Yeah, I started. Not even that, because when she arrives, everybody has to stand, and then we play national anthem. So there's no point.
Recording in progress.
Ladies and gentlemen, a warm round of applause for the Landship dancers and the Took band. Isn't that music infectious? Doesn't it make you want to just get up and start to dance? Maybe we should start something new here in Barbados, a dancing forum. Wouldn't we get more work done? We are preparing for the arrival of the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Amor Mottley. She'll be arriving in just a few minutes, so I will be asking you to stand, and when she arrives, immediately after her arrival, we will be playing the national anthem of Barbados. So in the meantime, if you don't know the person next to you, let's start making friends. Reach out, say hello, shake their hands, introduce yourselves. I'm already seeing hugs, so I know we're on the right path. I had a peep into the swag bag, and I saw some of the infamous Barbadian rum, so I know we're all going to be mellow and feeling nice before the end of the day. As you enter into the conference room, you're going to see a wonderful collection of artisans selling everything from local confectionery. I've already spent money. I've bought sorrel soap with rose clay. If you go around the corner, there's O'Malley's cocktails, which I promise you are amazing. There's several different things that you can purchase from our small artisans, so please make sure that you purchase homemade, locally produced souvenirs to take home to your various countries. Trust me, those things will make you want to come back to Barbados and find excuses to come back to Barbados. This evening, after the formalities here at Wyndham Grand Barbados, we will then be going over to the Crane Hotel, which is a little further up the road, for a wonderful evening of cultural entertainment, great food and beverages. I promise you, ladies, make sure you have on your flats. I can tell you no differently. Make sure you have on your flats. There's going to be dancing. You'll be met by several local characters and escorted to the restaurant area. There'll be opportunities to do photo ops, to take pictures, to just meet and enjoy each other. So make sure that you change, have on your flats, and be ready to leave here. I believe that the transportation leaves here this evening at 6. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the arrival of the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Amor Mottley, and remain standing for the playing of the national anthem of Barbados. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Limya Amor Mottley. Please be seated. Honorable Limya Amor Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator, the United Nations Development Program, Mr. José Manuel Salazar-Xirinachs, Executive Secretary, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, Ms. Muschett, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, United Nations Development Program, senior ministers and ministers of the Cabinet of Barbados, other ministers of the region, members of Parliament, heads of delegations, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives of international and regional organizations, members of the private sector, representatives of non-governmental organizations, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Jewel Ford, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for the 16th Ministerial Forum for Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, hosted by the Government of Barbados and the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, in collaboration with the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome you on their behalf to Barbados and to this morning's opening ceremony. We are delighted to have delegations from so many countries across the region, from the tropical islands to the Andes, from the desert to the Amazon, and everywhere in between. This region is truly rich in its diversity, and we hope that over the next 2 days, our delegates will draw on this diversity to achieve the goal of building social resilience. We also extend a warm welcome to our specially invited guests from across civil society and the private sector, as well as academia, multilateral organizations, and development partners. Collaboration among all these stakeholders is essential for building robust social policies. I now invite to the stage our moderator for the opening ceremony, Ms. Limya Eltayeb, UNDP resident representative for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. Limya's experience spans 27 years and 5 continents, with work on urban planning, local administration and services, human rights, climate justice, social justice, inclusion, and partnerships. Under her leadership, the UNDP is undertaking key initiatives in climate resilience, disaster recovery, blue and green economy, and digital transformation, governance reform, and innovation across the 10 countries that UNDP serves in the Eastern Caribbean. Over to you, Limya.
Thank you, Jewel. Good morning, Prime Minister, ministers, heads of delegations from across this magnificent continent, distinguished senior officials and colleagues and friends from UNDP and ECLAC, and esteemed partners from across the region. It is my immense pleasure to welcome you to the 16th Ministerial Forum for Latin America and the Caribbean for the first time in person in the Caribbean. We are thrilled. As we embark on 2 days of innovative and insightful discussions, we hope that we will be looking at resilience in action through social policies. We gather not only as representatives of our countries and organizations, but as advocates for humanity and social change. Since 2007, this ministerial forum has served as a vital space for collaboration, for dialogue, and for knowledge sharing. As we face dynamic socioeconomic shifts and geopolitical transitions, this forum aims to reinforce the region's commitment to protecting people and planet. In the words of Nelson Mandela, and I quote, "Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity, it is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made and can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. We can be that great generation, end quote. To get us started, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our first speaker for the morning and our host, the Honorable Kirk Humphrey, Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs. Known for his focus on empowering the most vulnerable, Minister Humphrey has been instrumental in driving legislative reform as well as social initiatives such as the One Family Program. His personal mantra, people over politics. He doesn't always say that, huh? Minister Humphrey is a true partner to the people of Barbados, to the region, and to UNDP. He has made this forum possible and a reality. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Minister.
A very special good morning to all of you. Honorable Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Mayor Amor Mottley, Mr. Achim Steiner, the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, Mr. José Manuel Salazar, the Executive Secretary of ECLAC, Ms. Muschett, the Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, senior ministers and ministers of the Cabinet, other ministers of the region, members of Parliament, heads of delegations, members of the Diplomatic Corps, representatives of international and regional organizations, members of the private sector, NGOs, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all. A very special good morning to all of you. I want to welcome you, many of you. It would be remiss of me if I did not. It has been a pleasure working with Simon and Limya and the entire team at UNDP. Limya, you've been a rock star, really. Thank you so much for the support. I want to thank all of you who dared to come to Barbados. If this is your first time, I invite you to come again. The conference ends on Friday. I invite you to stay on for the weekend for as long as you can, to get an opportunity to see what Barbados has to offer, to see what the Caribbean has to offer. As I said before, I also hope we take this opportunity to exchange numbers, exchange emails, and become friends, because it is the bureaucracy in a lot of our systems that is preventing us from doing work. A lot of us with the political will to make things happen, challenged by the bureaucracy. So quiero darles oficialmente la bienvenida a todos a la hermosa isla de Barbados. Welcome to Barbados. May God bless all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirk. Thank you for setting the stage for what promises to be an engaging and solutions-oriented forum. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce my regional director, the regional director for UNDP in Latin America and the Caribbean, maybe I should say in the Caribbean and Latin America, Ms. Muschett. Ms. Muschett leads efforts to address development challenges in the region with a focus on active citizenship, governance, democracy, social protection, climate resilience, and reducing inequalities. As a former Minister of Social Development in the Panama, she brings extensive experience in public policy and development, adding a unique perspective into the region's challenges and opportunities. I now invite Michelle to the stage.
Thank you, Limya. Her Excellency, Honorable Mia Amor Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Kirk Humphrey, Minister of People, Empowerment and Elder Affairs, and the great champion behind this forum, Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, a privilege to have you with us here today, querido José Manuel Salazar-Xirinachs, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, and co-organizer of this forum alongside UNDP. Simon Springett, United Nations Resident Coordinator in Barbados. Limya Eltayeb, our resident representative for UNDP to Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. Members of Cabinet of Barbados, ministers from the region, delegates, development partners, colleagues, dear friends. I would like to start by reiterating our many times expressed gratitude to Barbados, represented here at its highest level in the figure of the Prime Minister and the members of the Cabinet for hosting this 16th Ministerial Forum for Development in Latin America and the Caribbean, and the first in person in the Caribbean. I would like to commend your leadership, Minister Humphrey, and the great collaboration with UNDP and ECLAC teams in making this possible, and all the hard work that is behind this. But as you mentioned yesterday, we enjoyed so much the process to the point that it didn't feel like work. I would like to extend my deepest appreciation to the 27 countries represented in this meeting, and a record number of Caribbean countries and ministers participating from this forum. This happening in times in which attained progress in Latin America and the Caribbean is under enormous pressure. In recent decades, Latin America and the Caribbean achieved great progress in terms of social development, democratic consolidation that are today at risk. Poverty, which once enveloped half of the population of our region, was reduced to the 25%, using the 6.8 line. Child mortality was cut in half, dropping from over 33 per 1,000 live births to 16 per 1,000 births. And the number of children out of school was significantly reduced from 1 in 4 to 1 in 10. And as people's lives improved, the country's economies grew, turning LAC into a middle-income region with all the caveats already mentioned by Minister Humphrey. During that same period, the region also underwent a process of democratic consolidation, becoming the third most democratic region in the world, after Europe and North America. Paul Sutton, which many of the Caribbean ministers may know, has argued at some points in his work that the Caribbean could be seen the most democratic region in the world, something to expand and discuss, but something that has been said. And with various specific exceptions, most changes in government in our region occur through free and fair elections and in peaceful and institutional context. From 2015 to the present, of the 35 elections that took place in the region, only 9 maintained the ruling coalition, reflecting an overall trend of transfer of power after alternation in democratic context. Democracies in the region also made progress towards human rights, expanding participation and representation mechanisms, and strengthened institutions responsible for organizing electoral process, with the number of women in the political arena nearly tripled. But all this development in terms of human development, economic, and democratic gains start to stall, and in some cases regress, even before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, the Human Development Index for Latin America and the Caribbean remains below pre-pandemic levels. José Manuel and ECLAC has been insisting on the fact that we are already living on a second lost decade in terms of economic growth. And the impact of disruptive technologies, the increase in political polarization, the institutions' failure to meet and deliver on the citizens' demand are generating a democratic backslide in Latin America and the Caribbean. And in a world more interconnected than ever, and entering deeper into the era of the Anthropocene, new risks are emerging that are more intense, more compounded, more severe, affecting and impacting social, economic, political, and environmental dimensions of development, and putting enormous pressure on decision makers. So I would like to acknowledge and express my deepest appreciation for your presence here today in the middle of these challenging times, and to have prioritized this event on your busy and complex agendas, to spend some time on reimagining our future in Latin America and the Caribbean, and identifying what are those policies and transformations in terms of institutions and processes that we need to advance to get back on track to achieve a more sustainable and resilient development. And we need to interrogate ourselves Why that spike in pressure in Latin America and the Caribbean? What are those pressure points that are generating these levels of tension in our region? What is driving this shift at this critical point of development in Latin America and the Caribbean? And we see as part of these pressure points the unresolved structural challenges of our region. High inequalities, vulnerability to poverty, low productivity, enormous levels of informality in our region that has been persistent despite all the progress achieved. Second, we see the levels of frustration for unresolved structural challenges combined with the uncertainty and insecurity that emerging risks are putting on our peoples, on our societies. And we see that in the region, protests increased over 30% since 2019, peaking at 25,000 protests in 2022, reflecting a collective crisis of expectations. We are the region in which polarization increased the most in the last 2 decades, and trust in institutions has decreased significantly, reaching levels close to only at 20%. Opening the door to other threats, such as organized crime and the emergence of populist leaderships in the region. So, in addition to that, and speaking about resilience from the Caribbean, we can't leave out as an important pressure point the pressure caused by the rapidly changing climate. We saw this year how the hurricane season in the Caribbean started as early as never before, and we see in the region how the limiting access from water derived from droughts and increasingly wildfires impacting, in particular, much regions in South America is generating a lot of pressure. And finally, but this is not an exhaustive list of the pressure points, we have the rapid technological adoption that is transforming how people in our region communicate, work, engage with institutions, while technological advancements and digital technology can also offer new opportunities for participation and innovation. They also present significant challenges that threaten to exacerbate existing inequalities. Excelencias, no estamos aquí únicamente porque vivimos en tiempos de grandes desafíos en nuestra región, sino porque estamos convencidos que trabajando de la mano de los socios que tenemos en la sala el día de hoy, PNUD, ECLAC, con ustedes y de cara a sus prioridades, podemos ser capaces de identificar cuáles son esas válvulas de escape que necesitamos en nuestros sistemas hoy en día para canalizar esa presión y convertirla tal vez en una fuerza y en un motor que nos ayude a escribir un nuevo capítulo en la historia del desarrollo y de nuestras democracias en la región. Y esto amerita una revisión de las válvulas de escape existentes. Con esto me refiero a instituciones, políticas públicas, procesos, pero también pensar en qué otras tal vez necesitemos diseñar de cero en este momento para poder atender a los desafíos que experimentamos hoy. Y en recalibrar las existentes está parte de los temas que discutiremos en estos 2 días. Sistemas de protección social universales han sido ya un consenso por parte de los países de la región. Sin embargo, necesitamos analizar con mayor detalle cómo los sistemas de protección social pueden ser capaces de tener en cuenta la matriz de riesgo en evolución en nuestra región. Cuando hablamos de nuevas válvulas de escape, son aquellas que nos permitan navegar las transformaciones y transiciones que están en curso en el mundo y que van a continuar avanzando. Y depende de nosotros como región el lograr los mecanismos, las instituciones, los procesos y las políticas públicas que nos permitan convertir esas transiciones en una oportunidad para el desarrollo. Y usemos como ejemplo la transición digital, la inteligencia artificial y las nuevas tecnologías y la importancia de poder diseñar mecanismos y procesos que garanticen que sean fuerzas para abonar a la inclusión, a la participación, a la productividad, en lugar de solo amenazas. Y hay medios para lograr este recalibraje de nuestras válvulas de escape. El primero, seguramente, el diálogo, como medio fundamental para reconstruir confianza en un momento donde la confianza es escasa, en las relaciones interpersonales, en el funcionamiento de nuestras instituciones y de los gobiernos. Y la democracia es en esencia eso, una conversación entre personas, entre las personas y sus representantes, entre ciudadanos, entre instituciones, que no necesariamente vamos a estar de acuerdo, pero somos capaces de lograr un mínimo de consensos de cara a esa visión compartida de desarrollo que queremos avanzar en nuestros países y en nuestra región. Lo que se hace fundamental en un momento en el que el mundo y la región es más interdependiente que nunca antes. Y cuando vemos los desafíos que nos afectan en este momento, su inmensa mayoría trasciende fronteras. Cuando pensamos en cambio climático, cuando pensamos en crimen organizado, pero también cuando pensamos en infraestructura digital, en comercio, en cadenas de valor, necesitamos respuestas que vayan más allá de las respuestas internas a los niveles de los países. Y este ejercicio va a servir también para el PNUD poder informar su próximo informe regional sobre desarrollo humano, cuyo tema central es el mismo tema de la conferencia que hoy nos convoca. Es cómo somos capaces de construir mecanismos que nos permitan avanzar un desarrollo humano que sea resiliente ante los shocks emergentes que estamos experimentando en la región. Y de cierta manera, estos niveles de presión que estamos experimentando pueden ser vistos también como un privilegio, como el privilegio de un resultado de años de progreso, de décadas de progreso. Que nuestras democracias estén bajo presión en este momento parte de la premisa de que vivimos en una región con vocación democrática. Y realmente eso es un privilegio cuando lo comparamos con fenómenos que están sucediendo en otras partes de nuestro mundo. Y estamos aquí también porque entendemos que estas acciones requieren del mayor sentido de urgencia y de rescatar esa capacidad innovadora que tuvo la región en décadas anteriores de estar al frente del desarrollo de las políticas sociales con programas que luego han sido replicados en otras partes del mundo. Esa misma capacidad de innovar la tenemos hoy y debemos ponerla al servicio de los desafíos que estamos enfrentando, que no son los mismos del pasado. Es muy claro que más de lo mismo no va a funcionar y por eso este encuentro se hace tan importante. Este foro, y quiero invitarlos a que lo veamos como una oportunidad para conectar, para construir relaciones, como decía el ministro Humphrey, que nos permitan ser mucho más fuertes en nuestros procesos y sentirnos acompañados en el camino de buscar soluciones a los desafíos de nuestra región, pero también un espacio para reimaginar ese futuro inmediato del desarrollo en América Latina y el Caribe. De alguna manera, el futuro del desarrollo de nuestra región está en las manos de nosotros, de esta generación, y en buena parte de quienes se encuentran en esta sala, como les compartía en el y para eso cuentan con todas las capacidades
and we rely on the capacities of all of you, ECLAC, UNDP, decades of experience, and the country
que sea sostenible y fortalecer la institucionalidad democrática, con una presencia universal, pero también en cada uno de sus países, con una red
with a global network of experience in terms of development, which is at your disposal, and with the capacity to generate the solutions and develop according to your priorities, national priorities. This space is an opportunity for us to learn from you.
Trabajando de la mano con nuestros socios, estén a la altura de los desafíos de hoy y que puedan acompañarlos a ustedes de una mejor manera. Yo concluyo con esperanza. La esperanza que me da verlos a ustedes reunidos hoy en el marco de este foro. La esperanza que me da la enorme riqueza que tiene nuestra región, la más biodiversa del planeta, con una riqueza multicultural extraordinaria, y una pequeña muestra de eso la tuvimos antes de iniciar este foro, con una extraordinaria capacidad de innovar. Y estoy convencida que es posible abrir paso para un mejor desarrollo que sea más resiliente y más inclusivo en la región. Su presencia hoy es la mejor garantía para tener este sentido de esperanza. Quiero agradecerles por su confianza y no puedo concluir sin expresar mi más profunda gratitud por todos los equipos que estuvieron involucrados en hacer este encuentro, este importante encuentro, hoy posible. Estoy segura que vamos a hacer de esto un éxito y que a partir de aquí podemos redoblar nuestros esfuerzos para construir un desarrollo resiliente en nuestra región. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Michelle, for these insightful thoughts and provocative thoughts as well. Just reflecting on what has been said by the two previous speakers, we realize that more than ever, garnering and coalescing partnerships is imperative. None of us can do this work alone, and this forum is an example. The collaboration between UNDP and ECLAC to provide this space and maintain this space for policy dialogue showcases what can happen when we all work collectively and cross the bridges, as Minister Humphrey said. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. José Manuel Salazar-Xirinachs, Executive Secretary of ECLAC, with a distinguished career spanning academia, public policy, and international organizations. Mr. Salazar served as senior positions in ILO and the World Trade Organization. His work focuses on promoting economic development, inclusive growth, and resilient social protection systems. Please welcome Mr. Salazar.
Good morning, Her Excellency Ms. Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados, dear Mr. Kirk, Humphrey, Minister of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs of Barbados, dear Muschett, Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations Development Program, dear Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, dear Simon Springett, President Coordinator of the United Nations in Barbados, honorable ministers from Latin America and the Caribbean, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. For ECLAC, it is a great pleasure and honor to be celebrating together with our partners at UNDP one more edition of this important ministerial forum for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. As you know, since 2014, ECLAC and UNDP have joined forces to jointly convene year after year the governments of the region to organize this forum in coordination with the program of work of the Regional Conference for Social Development of Latin America and the Caribbean. That is why this afternoon we will also have the sixth meeting of the presiding officers of the Regional Conference for Social Development. Excelencias, en esta ocasión tan importante, nuestra conversación ocurre en un contexto global y regional de alta complejidad e incertidumbre, rivalidades geopolíticas, conflictos armados que ponen en entredicho la paz mundial, tendencias tecnológicas, demográficas, migratorias y climáticas disruptivas y una globalización en proceso de reconfiguración. Los impactos del cambio climático son especialmente fuertes aquí en el Caribe, con daños anuales en varios países que suman varios puntos del Producto Interno Bruto, por lo que el tema de la resiliencia ante la vulnerabilidad es un tema absolutamente central en esta región, como también discutimos ampliamente en la reunión de Trinidad y Tobago de la Caribbean Development Cooperation Committee. Las tasas de crecimiento del comercio internacional y la inversión extranjera directa a nivel mundial registran una desaceleración significativa desde la crisis financiera del 2008 y 2009. Y la rivalidad geopolítica y tecnológica ha llevado a que la seguridad, más que la eficiencia, se haya convertido en el objetivo prioritario en la administración de la interdependencia global. Hoy día, los países hablan y priorizan la seguridad energética, la seguridad alimentaria, la seguridad en cadenas de suministro, etc. Hemos pasado de celebrar la interdependencia a desconfiar de la interdependencia y a buscar estrategias de de-risking. Desde la CEPAL vemos a una región inmersa en una crisis de desarrollo caracterizada por tres trampas, una de baja capacidad para crecer, otra de alta desigualdad, baja movilidad social y débil cohesión social, y una tercera de capacidades institucionales débiles y gobernanza poco efectiva. Los datos sobre la primera trampa son elocuentes. Entre el 2015 y el 24, el Producto Interno Bruto de la región ha crecido a solo 0.9% en promedio por año. Esto es menos que el 2% al que la región creció en la famosa década perdida de los 80s. Y por lo tanto, el Producto Interno Bruto per cápita promedio de la región en el mismo periodo ha crecido a solo 0.1%, es decir, prácticamente no ha crecido. La trampa de baja capacidad para crecer es muy preocupante, porque son con tasas de crecimiento de entre el 1 y el 2%, no en años excepcionales, sino como promedio de una década, es muy difícil reducir pobreza e informalidad, crear empleos de calidad y generar ingresos fiscales para financiar necesidades de inversión pública y de gasto social. Durante nuestro reciente 40º periodo de sesiones a principios del mes de octubre, presentamos el documento titulado América Latina y el Caribe ante las trampas del desarrollo, transformaciones indispensables y cómo gestionarlas, en el que analizamos las 3 trampas e identificamos 11 grandes transformaciones en los modelos de desarrollo de la región para salir de las trampas y cerrar las brechas. Estamos insistiendo también no solo en los qué hacer, sino en los cómo hacerlo. Y esta pregunta sobre los cómo la aterrizamos en 4 temas. El tema de la gobernanza de las políticas, el tema de las capacidades top, técnicas, operativas, políticas y prospectivas de las instituciones, los espacios de diálogo social para involucrar a todos los actores relevantes y la economía política de las transformaciones. De esta forma, para salir de la trampa de baja capacidad para crecer, estamos insistiendo en la gran importancia de las políticas de desarrollo productivo, que entre otras cosas apuesten a un portafolio de sectores impulsores o dinamizadores, tales como sectores industriales, servicios modernos habilitados por el Internet, la sociedad del cuidado, los sectores del gran impulso hacia la sostenibilidad, como las energías renovables, la electromovilidad, la agricultura sostenible, el turismo sostenible, por supuesto, y otros. Además, estamos recomendando metodologías de gobernanza tales como las iniciativas clúster y otras, temas todos que hemos analizado en detalle en nuestro reciente nuevo reporte emblemático titulado Panorama de las políticas de desarrollo productivo en América Latina y el Caribe. En cuanto a la trampa de alta desigualdad y baja movilidad social y baja cohesión social, que está en el centro de los temas que ocupan a este foro, la vemos como un fenómeno multidimensional, tanto en relación a los factores que la generan y reproducen, como en sus manifestaciones, abarcando no solo los ingresos. Está relacionada también con bajos niveles de movilidad y cohesión social. Y lamentablemente lleva a situaciones de creciente malestar social y elevados niveles de desconfianza interpersonal e institucional. Vemos a esta trampa arraigada en 7 factores que actúan como causas fundamentales. Primero, la alta desigualdad está arraigada en lo productivo, con economías con baja capacidad para crecer y alta heterogeneidad productiva que se asocia con un mercado de trabajo poco dinámico, con alta informalidad y grandes diferencias de productividad entre sectores, entre tamaños de empresa y entre regiones o subregiones dentro de un país. De aquí la importancia de las políticas de desarrollo productivo en la reducción de la desigualdad y la promoción de la movilidad social. Segundo, la desigualdad está también asociada con sistemas tributarios regresivos, sesgados hacia los impuestos indirectos que limitan significativamente el potencial poder redistributivo de los sistemas tributarios. Tercero, los sistemas de protección social son un ámbito fundamental para reducir la desigualdad, aumentar la movilidad social, la cohesión social y la resiliencia. Los sistemas de pensiones, contributivos y no contributivos, los sistemas de salud, las políticas activas de mercado de trabajo, son solo algunos de los ámbitos de la política social que son claves para reducir desigualdad. Por lo tanto, es esencial fortalecer las políticas sociales y de protección social y la correspondiente institucionalidad. En cuarto lugar, está el papel clave de la educación y la formación profesional. Para que la educación pueda desarrollar su potencial como vía de movilidad social y desarrollo productivo se precisan no solo altas tasas de escolaridad, sino una mejora en la calidad del aprendizaje. Y esto es un área en que siguen existiendo grandes deficiencias en los sistemas educativos de la región. Para que la educación sea un verdadero promotor de la movilidad social ascendente y de reducción de desigualdad, los ministerios de educación enfrentan el reto de fortalecer sus capacidades técnicas, operativas, políticas y prospectivas. Quinto, una causa fundamental de la desigualdad es la desigualdad de género. La propuesta que se ha desarrollado para combatir la desigualdad de género es la sociedad del cuidado, una propuesta transformadora, esencial para reducir la desigualdad y promover la inclusión social. En sexto lugar, las ciudades. Las ciudades latinoamericanas y caribeñas tienden a ser fábricas de desigualdades, con altos niveles de ocupación informal del suelo y edificación al margen de las regulaciones estatales, segregación espacial, con altos costos de transporte para los sectores pobres, hacinamiento habitacional y otras privaciones de acceso a servicios de agua, de saneamiento y de electricidad. Todo lo anterior lleva a importantes niveles de exclusión social. De esta forma, avanzar hacia ciudades inclusivas es parte también fundamental de la agenda para reducir las desigualdades y mejorar la cohesión social en la región. Y por último, en este listado, no incluye todo, pero recoge una parte importante de los factores que alimentan la desigualdad. Está el tema de la discriminación y las violaciones de los derechos humanos que sufren ciertos grupos de población, como los indígenas, los afrodescendientes y otros. Trabajar e incidir únicamente en una o dos de estas causas fundamentales de la alta desigualdad, la baja movilidad social y la débil cohesión social no será suficiente para salir de la trampa. Es necesario un enfoque integrado que incida simultáneamente sobre todas ellas. Y esta es tal vez una de las razones por las que la desigualdad ha sido una de las características más conocidas desde hace décadas, pero también que más se resiste a ser transformada en los países de la región, por supuesto, junto con los intereses y equilibrios de poder que se oponen a la mejora en algunos de estos aspectos. A las trampas de bajo crecimiento y elevada desigualdad se suma la de débiles capacidades institucionales y gobernanza poco efectiva, que complican la definición, implementación y articulación de acciones transformadoras que cuenten con una amplia legitimidad social y política. Estos temas están muy relacionados con las prioridades recién abordadas en la Cumbre del Futuro de las Naciones Unidas que tuvo lugar hace algunas semanas en Nueva York. En efecto, las acciones priorizadas en la Declaración sobre las generaciones futuras, por ejemplo, allí los países acordaron como parte de la Acción 6 invertir en las personas para acabar con la pobreza y reforzar la confianza y la cohesión social. El llamado de la CEPAL es a crear un nuevo consenso regional en torno a los desafíos del desarrollo y cómo enfrentarlos. Para ello, en cada país se requieren visiones y estrategias de mediano y largo plazo con la participación genuina de todos los actores de la sociedad y un Estado e instituciones competentes con capacidades para orientar, convocar y ofrecer servicios de calidad. Ante ese desafío, la temática principal de este foro, la idea de una resiliencia en acción, con políticas sociales para navegar la incertidumbre, nos da una gran oportunidad para discutir a fondo el reforzamiento de las capacidades institucionales en el área social, así como el aporte transformador de las políticas sociales para simultáneamente generar y cerrar brechas de bienestar, contribuir a la capacidad de respuesta social e institucional, a una estructura de riesgos en rápida reconfiguración. En la cuarta reunión de la Conferencia Regional sobre Desarrollo Social en el 2021, esta temática también fue el centro de las deliberaciones y ahí también se desarrolló un foco en la realidad del Caribe bajo el generoso auspicio de Antigua y Barbuda. En aquel momento subrayamos la importancia de articular las políticas de protección social con las de gestión de riesgos de desastre, con foco en la prevención y desarrollar y fortalecer una doble resiliencia a nivel de las personas y a nivel de las instituciones, en especial en el caso de la protección social, para que ésta sea universal, integral, sostenible y resiliente. A pocas semanas luego de la Cumbre y Declaración del Futuro, debemos relevar la importancia de adoptar una perspectiva de futuro con foco en las próximas generaciones. Esta mirada también debe hacerse cargo de los desafíos pendientes después de casi 30 años transcurridos desde la Conferencia de Copenhague y rumbo a la segunda Cumbre Mundial sobre Desarrollo Social. No en vano, la Declaración del Futuro llama explícitamente a que los resultados de la Segunda Cumbre Mundial sobre Desarrollo Social que se celebrará en 2025 sean ambiciosos. En la CEPAL queremos responder a este llamado y por ello la 6ª reunión de mesa directiva de nuestra Conferencia de Desarrollo Social para América Latina y el Caribe, que se va a realizar esta tarde, invitará a los países a identificar prioridades, desafíos y mensajes para que la voz de nuestra región ocupe un lugar que la represente en las discusiones que ya se iniciaron de camino hacia la Cumbre Social Mundial del año entrante. Esperamos que las discusiones que sostendremos en estos días sean un eslabón importante en ese proceso. Esperamos también avanzar hacia la Segunda Cumbre Mundial fortaleciendo las capacidades y la eficiencia de las políticas públicas y en la definición de una agenda para el desarrollo social inclusivo con compromisos relevantes para nuestra región y que contribuyan a movilizar las voluntades de nuestros países. Y en ese sentido, esta reunión y con el gran liderazgo de Barbados y la primera ministra Mottley, estamos en buenas manos y es un paso hacia adelante. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Salazar. Thank you for the interconnectivity and your valuable reflections. I now have the honor of introducing the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, Mr. Achim Steiner, who will draw on his extensive experience and offer a global perspective. Mr. Steiner has been the Administrator of UNDP since 2017 and has decades of leadership experience in international organizations, including serving as the Executive Director of UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. He is a global advocate for innovation and sustainable development, for the SDGs, for climate action, for poverty eradication. His leadership at UNDP focused on supporting countries in addressing these global challenges, including financing for development. Please welcome the UNDP Administrator, Achim Steiner.
Right, Honorable Prime Minister Limya, Amor, Mottley, Honorable Minister Humphrey, my dear colleagues José Manuel, Michelle, Simon, and Limya on the podium, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and delegates and participants to the 16th Ministerial Forum for Development in Latin America and the Caribbean with a capital C, as you just pointed out. May I begin, Prime Minister, by just saying what an honor and a pleasure it is to be in your country, amongst your people, but also with you, who just came back last night and joined us immediately at this forum here, having just spent the last few days looking at the world from the vantage point of a Caribbean island nation, but also, as you have become over the years, a global advocate to looking at the future of development differently, with clearer eyes and clearer recognition of where we are perhaps failing to understand that things really have to be reconstructed, as you have often called for. My joining you here at this forum is also a tribute to, I think, the wonderful work that our colleagues Michelle and José Manuel are doing together. In our United Nations family, we have many different entities, many different fora, and in fact, we are very proud that not only one, but in fact 2 major international meetings are happening this year, hosted by Caribbean nations, Antigua and Barbuda, just a few months ago with the SID Summit, and now we are here with the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean, focusing on some of the fundamental questions that are at the forefront of your minds as ministers, as governments, but let us also be clear, at the forefront of your citizens. And I love the title that you have, Minister, People Empowerment and Elders Affairs. I'm just called administrator. I wish I could invoke the kind of aspiration and ambition that is embodied also in the title of a ministerial portfolio. I also stand here before you as somebody who deeply believes in multilateralism. And as I shared with ministers at our breakfast this morning, being a not only convinced multilateralist, but also a leader within the United Nations system at this moment in time, sometimes makes not for easy getting up in the mornings. These are tough times. But actually, they're also extremely important times. And I'm very proud and very humbled to be here with you, because amongst you are many of the leaders in your countries who are facing precisely the kinds of challenges, contradictions, setbacks, frustrations that are driving the political arena in each of your countries and indeed across the world at the moment. This is an era that is an era of disruption. We are seeing a world that is returning to conflict and competition and wars, with more people displaced, more refugees, more suffering than we have seen for decades. We are not at a glorious moment of sustainable development advancements. And therefore, yes, this is a moment where reflecting on what is going wrong and also where are the pathways for moving forward within each one of our countries, nations, communities, but also as a global family of nations. And again, Prime Minister, I want to thank you, because Barbados is a small country, but it has brought a global voice to understanding how it is that the fate of one nation in the 21st century is not only a function of the decisions taken within its own borders, but is in so many ways also dependent, a product, but also an architect of a global response to so many of these challenges that we now face. I want to just dwell for a couple of moments on the theme and the term resilience that has been at the center of the discussions leading up also to the Bridgetown declaration that will come out of this meeting. I asked my colleagues, José Manuel and Michel, this morning, does resilience as it has emerged in the English language translate in the same way into Spanish, for example, resiliencia? Well, in some ways it does, but it is actually an interesting phenomenon how in our world of development speak, as we sometimes call it, new terms arrive. And I think it is not a coincidence that the term resilience has become such a prominent term, in part to confront the many challenges we face. It's not a new theory of development, but it is highlighting the fact that, first of all, we live in an extraordinary, vulnerable time when it comes to environmental change and climate change. Nowhere else than here in the Caribbean, or indeed across Latin America, do I need to remind us of this. As we speak today, Spanish people and citizens are waking up to a catastrophic flood event. In Brazil, for the first time, lakes are running dry because of a drought that has not been seen in decades. And I could go on, because you can switch on television almost every day now and see how the scenarios that 20 years ago the scientists were beginning to give us as actors and as politicians and as decision makers have moved from scenarios to realities playing out before our very eyes. But resilience, even though its origins come perhaps out of that more natural science and environmental science-oriented world, in fact, increasingly, I think, also applies to the economic and social. Both José Manuel and Michel have spoken about it. Many of you are at the forefront of addressing some of the deepest tensions and also contradictions, perhaps, in terms of development impacts. Inequality, the perception of citizens that they're increasingly not aligned with where government is meant to serve them or function. How an economy that is sometimes measured in GDP growth may sound very healthy, but in terms of the lived reality of citizens, is for most people somewhere completely different. Resilience is also about understanding that we do need to confront more clearly and more deliberately not only the shocks, be they environmental, and again, island nations have been examples where a third of your GDP can be wiped out in a matter of 12 to 24 hours. But also to look at resilience as something that actually prepares us better for many of the sometimes difficult choices that lie ahead. We do live in an age of disruption, the pandemic having been a magnifying glass to many of the vulnerabilities in our societies. And they extend from inequality, as we saw in the ability to either continue education or not during the pandemic, right through to the ability to go and borrow money in order to stabilize your economy and protect small and medium-scale enterprises in terms of their ability to survive the pandemic and the shutdowns that we saw. But it was also a moment in which we realized that good governance, functioning institutions, the ability of the government to step in at a moment when an economy implodes is also part of resilience. The term may seem strange to some, but I think it is actually a very good looking glass through which to examine right now how do we move forward. Much of UNDP's work today across the world is, as Michelle already alluded to, very much focused on the future of development. None of your countries need us in the United Nations system, from wherever aspect or angle or specialized agency we may come from, to tell you what your problems are. We live in a world where your citizens are the first ones to be able to articulate the challenges, but also increasingly the solutions. The question is, are we able together, as UNDP and many of your countries with whom we have been partners for decades, we have walked alongside of you for decades learning about how development needs to evolve, are we able to look to the future of development and then work backwards into the present in order to also seize the opportunities? The irony, perhaps, of this moment in history in which we live right now, very diverse depending on who you are and where you live on this planet, is ironically both an era of disruption and setbacks and also perhaps a most unprecedented era of opportunity. I would even go as far as saying we live in an age of possibility and we are not seizing them. And what is at the heart of these failures to seize these opportunities? Sometimes it is misguided policies, sometimes it is polarized societies. Radicalization, disengagement, confrontation are present in so many of our countries across the globe today. They paralyze government, they also disturb economies, and ultimately they don't solve problems, they simply entrench problems. Part of our role as UNDP in a world of development possibilities is to be a partner not with the answers of what it is that you need to do, but rather as a great connector to all those who are constantly working on the same challenges, whether it's social safety nets, economic stimulus packages, addressing inequality, but also seizing and investing in the opportunities that technology and science is offering us. Much of our work across the world has traditionally been focused on governance and economic development. We continue to be an institution that is a wanted and often, I think, appreciated partner in this. But we are also increasingly focusing on how do we move forward? How does a country that is not maybe a home to many of the financial institutions and therefore the capital markets, nevertheless shape its own destiny by being smarter about how it is able to leverage the possibilities of this moment? Again, Prime Minister, I want to pay a tribute to you because you have taken on a battle that many would have said, wow, where does the courage come from? Reforming the international financial architecture. I mean, it is not exactly the subject that you would have woken up in your younger years and declared the top of the agenda, and yet you arrived precisely at the conclusion that unless we tackle our international financial system and begin to address some of its irrationalities, namely that we are in an age where there is more money than ever before in human history in our financial systems. In fact, our money, your savings, your pensions. It is a strange phenomenon that we somehow have ended up in a situation where our financial institutions have, in a sense, become the owners of the very wealth that belongs to each one of our citizens. We are transacting in a third degree of abstraction that allows a world to be full of funds and those who are holding them saying we can't invest them, and yet the world that urgently needs finance in order to solve problems that are existential, not only to their own citizens, but actually to the future of humanity, are not able to access finance. To be working in UNDP at this moment in time is not only to be a strong partner to each of your countries, it is also to connect the dots, both in terms of the frontiers of innovation, but also in terms of tackling some of the contradictions in our international system. We are in the 21st century bound by destiny and possibility to realize that we have to work together as an international community. Sustainable development in our era is premised and essentially prejudiced if actions are not taken, often by those who are outside our national jurisdictions. Being able to put a spotlight on this, to understand that, for instance, the advent of new technologies, as we just saw at the Summit of the Future of the United Nations and the new Digital Global Compact, is as much about how the international community sets boundaries, but also ensures that this is not a technology that will privilege a few and leave most of the world behind. It is also about trying to understand how digital public infrastructure is a core responsibility of every state and government. This is one of the lessons of development that we in UNDP are currently learning with many of you to embrace and to quickly find a way in which to ensure that particularly least developed countries, smaller economies, are not left behind in what is a transformative moment, again, in the history of humanity and development. Digital and the advent of artificial intelligence will change everything in the way we think we can do things, or in the way it may leave so many behind and therefore decoupled from a global economy that is advancing at a very different pace. I end, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, by thanking you once again for finding a moment in your very busy lives to come together for this 16th Ministerial Forum. As both Michel and also José Manuel and Minister Humphrey said, this is not a negotiating forum. Amongst you, there are many different governments, policies, development pathways. But to have Latin America and the Caribbean hosted in the Caribbean, exchange, and also to think forward together, because whether you are a national government, a regional community, or part of a global family, we live in an age where much of what will happen in one country does require us to find common ground and shared interests on which to build those pathways out of crisis. Our responsibility as this generation at this moment in time, however harsh the headwinds may be, is in fact not to lose sight of the fact that we do live in an age of possibility, and the choices that we make will in fact determine so many opportunities that those who follow us, be they our children, our grandchildren, will actually benefit from. In that spirit, it is my privilege to join you here and over the next 2 days to listen to you and to carry with me, together with our teams in the UN family, the insights, but also the courageous directions that are emerging from within your region. And there are so many examples I could speak to right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Achim. Thank you, Administrator, for the insights into the global conversation that we are in the middle of. And thank you for outlining how we can collectively move forward. It is now my distinct privilege and honor to introduce the Honorable Amor Mottley. I love the Amor and the love that she shares not only with her continent, the sub-region and the region, but with the world. The Prime Minister of Barbados, with a prominent political career spanning over 30 years, since first taking office as Prime Minister in 2018. The Honorable Mottley has distinguished herself on the global stage as a strident advocate for vulnerable and developing states, particularly on climate justice, on inequalities, on fighting poverty, on access to finance, and on restructuring the international financial institutions and architecture. Among her many accolades is the UN Champion of the Earth Award, which she received in 2021 for her policy leadership. We are truly honored and privileged that you are here with us today, because I know that you've been traveling long and far, and I also know that you just came back. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming the Prime Minister of Barbados to deliver her feature address.
Thank you very much, Limya. To our distinguished guests on the platform, what do I say? Manuel, it is my honor to thank you publicly for you and your institution's responsiveness immediately after Hurricane Beryl to help us in the very difficult task of damage assessment and loss assessment. And when I spoke to you, you were traveling to New York, and you immediately arranged for the dispatching of a team here to be able to help us. And I want to thank you publicly for being as responsive as you were to the government and people of Barbados. And forgive me if I also single out Achim. I am so happy that you can join us today. I am aware that you are in your closing innings and will soon be departing UNDP in a few months. But it is a signal honor for us to receive you here today. UNDP, perhaps more than any other UN agency, has been that entity that has been in direct connection with the well-being and the ordinary people of this region, not only my country, but in particular from this office in Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean as well. And I'm sure that I can speak on behalf of my other brothers and sisters in CARICOM who have continued to be very grateful for the role that UNDP has played in helping us on this journey. And why? And I thank both Michelle and Simon, who are also here with us. But I ask us to reflect on why. We became independent countries in the Caribbean very recently. In the 1960s, 1962, with Jamaica and Trinidad leading the way. 1966, Guyana and Barbados, and we can come right back down through the Eastern Caribbean and Belize as we went through the process. And on becoming independent countries, we did so with a clear understanding that ours now was a responsibility to see people, hear people, and feel people, and to bring development to people who, for the most part, were seen as beasts of burden, and whose existence was only appreciated, regrettably, as a factor of production. We have, over the course of the last 60 years as a region, and less time depending on which point we've determined that we would become masters of our own fate, we recognize that the journey would be a complex journey and would require many decades really to reverse centuries of underdevelopment and centuries of culture that did not allow either our institutions or our cultural approaches to come to the point where it wanted to relieve poverty, it wanted to see healthy populations, it wanted to create opportunities. That became our responsibility. But the depths from which we were coming and the failure to have institutions that were appropriate to be able to develop our country has been the challenge that we have tried to manage over the course of the last 6 decades. The reality is that this report, produced by ECLAC on development traps in Latin America and the Caribbean, which has only just come out, captures it well with respect to the recognition that the development trap is linked to our low growth, low capacity for growth, high inequality and low social cohesion and mobility, and low institutional capacity and ineffective governance. We've been fighting this battle for the better part of 6 decades, and we've done reasonably well. Let us be very clear. We have lifted large numbers of our population out of poverty. But the fact that we still have an underbelly of poverty is what must drive us even further and harder than at any other time, because we have this underbelly of poverty at a time when the global environment is threatening to reduce back into poverty many countries that thought that they had turned the corner. And you would notice that I am in conversation mode, not speech mode. and I'm in conversation mode because it is important that we reflect on the fact that at the same time that we want to solve this problem of this underbelly of poverty, we are confronted with crises that can topple the state at any time. Whether that crisis is climate and the corresponding consequences arising from lack of appropriate measures to protect our biodiversity, as our colleagues in Colombia are meeting as we speak here, whether that threat comes from the pandemic, which if I had spoken about that a decade ago, you would have let it run off your back like water off of a duck's back. But the experience of almost 3 years of restricted movement and all that it brought with it, and the consequential post-traumatic stress disorder that is still lingering among members of our populations across the world, cause us to know that pandemics now are not to be ignored, and rather than being ignored, that they have the capacity to destabilize nations and to send people back into poverty, not to mention the lives that it will take. We have equally to fight this battle against all who believe that those who have should have more, and those who do not have should not get. And that is a simple way of describing, regrettably, the last 5 decades in particular of how the world has approached the issue of fairness and equity in wealth creation and in poverty eradication. The inequity that was allowed to cement itself across the developed world in particular, but equally the developing world. And you may say that we were accustomed to that because that was the modality for operation and colonization, so that was nothing new for us. But that inequity has bred a level of distrust at worst and apathy at best, at the very time when the world needs to be able to have its population globally helping in the fight against these crises that can all destabilize us. And if we thought we had difficulties with access to development funding, it has become worse, because at the very time that we need development funding for people, we equally need funding for adaptation and resilient building, because the environment within which we are living is now equally a threat to our people's capacity to survive. This can be daunting, but it need not remove from us the option of being optimistic on our capacity to become resilient. We're in a parish where, for us, our first national hero comes as a result of a failed revolution in this parish. And that attempt to claim freedom was also married to a resilient character. Because while those who led the revolution, Bussa and Nanny Gregg and all the rest, may have failed in the revolution and regrettably lost their lives, those who remained had to develop a level of resilience just to be able to survive, particularly given the antagonistic atmosphere and environment within which they were then forced to live. Now, I cannot imagine any of us in here, in this country, in this region, in this hemisphere, facing those challenges and being able to survive in the manner in which they did, such that even though the journey was long and hard, they were able to make a defining difference in allowing us to reach a completely different set of circumstances for the great-grandchildren and the great-great-grandchildren of those people. I refer to that simply to give us comfort and confidence that no matter how daunting these challenges seem, I believe that we are equal to the task. And I believe that our ability to recognize where the difficulties are will help us solve them. The Bridgetown Initiative speaks first and foremost to the need for the reform of international financial institutions, not because we have nothing else to do, but because they have not worked in the interests of lifting our countries fully out of difficult circumstances that have denied development for all of our people. And as I said, if you combine that now with the new crises that have emerged, the need for financing becomes even all the more critical. And as we say all the time, it is a false dichotomy to ask me to choose between people and planet with respect to the development policies that we must pursue. As I've said to our people during COVID, we are not a one-issue people. We're not a one-issue people. And we may rise and solve the problems of developing critical infrastructure and becoming more resilient, and then end up dying from crime or from a pandemic. We have to be able to manage the multiplicity of challenges, or as we would say in simple language, we gotta be able to walk and talk and chew, and do multiple things, because that's what defines human beings from most other living organisms. The capacity to be able to be multifaceted and to be nuanced and to be sensitive. And it is against that backdrop that I ask us then, as ministers of this region and hemisphere, to start to reflect on those things that are critical. When this government came to office, and it is important that I share this perspective with you, because this is not an esoteric discussion. This is real. When we came to office, we were the third most indebted country in the world, officially with a debt to GDP ratio of 158%, but with another 19.6% in arrears, money that was owed by the government of Barbados that was not paid and not brought to account, bringing our debt to GDP ratio effectively to 177%. Sounds like a lot of arithmetic to ordinary people out there. But what did it mean? That we were coming to work every day and all we could do is pay debt and pay salaries. Everything else that was necessary to be able to move institutions and move programs forward was simply not there. We took a decision, hard as it was, that we had to restructure our debt, but that, as I said to the managing director of the IMF within 1 week of coming to office, that if you're going to ask people to go on a long journey, you need to give them a little breakfast. And to that extent, that was the euphemism. Do not leave out the social protection necessary for our people. Because if we did, we would be having a far greater problem. We can bring back down debt virtually overnight, as we showed. 3 months for our domestic debt, 1 year for our international debt, because they just wanted to be able to benefit from high premium for risk. But when the risk became real, they wanted to run and say, no, they should not be made to take the cuts that they had to cut, having been rewarded for the high risk. But we got past that. But in getting past it, at the same time that we announced what we were doing with respect to debt, we recognized that our public servants had not had pay for a decade, no pay increase for a decade, and immediately a 5% increase was put on the table immediately upon coming into government, in the middle of an IMF program. Immediately, we also reintroduced the commitment that the government of Barbados would continue to once again pay for students to attend the University of the West Indies, even as we entered an IMF program, because we understand that without education, people really, truly cannot sustainably be lifted out of poverty. Families. And that the interaction of that family, once one person has made that step, invariably is that the rest are brought along, both in terms of inspiration, aspiration, and also reality. We then took the decision to start to address issues at the hospital, and while that is a complex issue which we're still addressing, the absence of a new accident and emergency department when built would have meant pandemonium in a pandemic, because we would have been treating people in a space that would have guaranteed the spread of the pandemic in a way that Barbados was able to insulate itself by having taken those early decisions and then by reinforcing it by taking the old US Naval Base and within 1 month turning it into a top quality hospital with the help of the European Investment Bank with respect to our ability to protect the whole population by having the treatment of persons at Harrison's Point and not in our sole main general hospital, for those of you who are not aware. And all of those things were done while at the same time having, for the first time in a decade, to buy buses to transport people who were not getting anywhere. And in buying the buses, to buy what is now the largest electronic fleet of buses in the Caribbean, and our commitment to be able to turn the corner with respect to that practice that would lead negatively to the climate that we're trying to protect. And we had to buy garbage trucks. And we had to turn around and then start the difficult task of structural reform, from pension reform right back through to reforming systems that were appropriate to a Victorian era with respect to child protection and child justice. And what Minister Humphrey is now leading and about to complete, changing a welfare system that was born out of a Victorian approach to bring it into a modern Barbados that allows us to be able to recognize that while the state accepts the ultimate responsibility for the vulnerable citizens in our midst, that it is not the state's responsibility alone, because we are family as a population. And if the evidence shows that 1 out of every 5 is below the poverty line, then it means that 4 out of every 5 are above the poverty line. And if 4 out of every 5 are above the poverty line, then together as a people, we can work to wrestle poverty down. We believe that all of these things, while in an IMF program, were possible. But then in 2019, we went further, and the country tends to sometimes forget these things, because I understand, as someone who has been in public life for more than 3 decades, that people are less interested in what you did yesterday and more interested in what you will do for me tomorrow. But we made a decision to put more disposable income in the hands of everybody working in this country. And we did it recognizing that it was important that people, one, could have the opportunity for developing savings, even though the banks continue, Achim, to treat savings as if it was their own, as you correctly said, by giving its clients 0.01% in interest, and by refusing to recognize that the new modality that they have with extracting fees ends up causing the person to feel as though they're relating to a security guard rather than a financial institution. So we increased the savings, and only last night I looked at it again, where the savings in this country has increased by virtually 2/3 in the last 6 years, in spite of going through a pandemic for almost 3 years. And that could only happen if greater disposable income was being left in people's pockets, so that we increase the reverse tax credit. This document speaks about regressive tax systems. This country introduced a reverse tax credit to ensure that those who pay value-added tax, in spite of the fact that we have a basket of goods that are exempted from it, of food and critical items, that they still pay VAT in other areas and services that they benefit, we give them back a reverse tax credit every year. And when we came to office, it was limited to persons earning, I believe, $18,000 and under, and we increased it to $25,000 and under, and we increased the volume of what they get to. Similarly, we expanded, no one pays taxes earning $25,000 and under, and we introduced a new credit called a compensatory income credit, that so long as the government can afford it, it will give you back every cent that you've paid in income taxes if you earn between $25,000 and $35,000 a year. And we have been able to afford it in spite of the pandemic in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. And long may that be the case. But we do it that way in order to let people remember that the burden of carrying the adjustment is all of ours. And we know it because we've walked it. In 5 years, this country has had 2 $1 billion adjustments. For those who want context, 2 adjustments of 10% of GDP in a small state in less than 5 years. So that when we say to you that we have done the heavy lifting and that we are asking for longer and more affordable capital, because it is only fair that we allow the children who will go to school in schools that we build to be able to become adults to help us pay back for that debt, rather than asking us to pay back for the debt when they're still in secondary school by giving us a 15-year loan. If you give us a 30 or 40-year or 50-year loan, then we have the capacity to ensure that the productivity that is necessary to lift our people out of poverty can be achieved because we have trained and developed and have the skill in order so to do. But a world that is driven by 10 and 15-year money will not create the space and opportunities for our people to be lifted out of poverty and to move to the next levels of prosperity that we expect them to do. I share these things because this is where the rubber hits the road. And that is why we ask for the reforms, but we don't do so blind to our own deficiencies. We understand the need for institutional capacity building. And that is why the reforms that Minister Humphrey is taking care of with respect to bringing the Welfare and the Child Care Board and all of the social service agencies is critical. In my first meetings, I asked, well, how many social workers do we have really? And when you check, we had almost 350 across the entire government. But because they were located here and there and everywhere, and were working with different objectives in mind, it meant that the results were equally not as effective as they could be. And one of the things we are therefore doing is recognizing that every social worker must be a first responder and then know who to refer matters to in terms of specializations that are required in terms of the delivery of solutions. And that is where we are going, even in the middle of an IMF program. We recognize that separate from institutional capacity, that we also have to deal with the issue of the very vexatious and difficult problem of mental readiness and cultural behavior. And only in the last 2 weeks, as I addressed the country through my own political convention and got the mandate from them that we need to be able to have a sustained program, if we are successful, to ensure that every citizen readies themselves, particularly coming out of the pandemic, for lifting heavy weight together. And what does that mean? That 5 beacons of excellence have been put forward by us, building on the things that we have that we want to keep. In Barbados, we grew up learning about a share pot mentality. In other words, we take care of each other. You got food today, you share with me. You ain't got food tomorrow, I share with you. The whole question of people working and seeing each other in communities, that's still good. But we need to go further, because what we recognize are that there are some things that are holding us back at the individual level. Voices of accountability, we need to be accountable, and we need to take responsibility for what we say and do. And we need to be able to speak up when we see things wrong, and we need to recognize that we can do things differently, but we must speak up and be accountable. Guardians of cleanliness, why? Because if our environment is clean, it starts a whole process that from our mind to our body to our environment, cleanliness then becomes the standard by which we start to guide ourselves. That we should be agents of respect. We use the word all the time among our respect due. But are we really agents of respect when we disrespect each other? When we turn up, even if when somebody has wronged us and we turn up at a school, do we have to block in order to communicate the message? Do we have to treat each other with disrespect, which then leads invariably to conflict? And it gives us no pleasure that Latin America and the Caribbean occupy virtually every spot in the top 10 countries in the world with the highest per capita homicide rate. There is no formal theater of war in this hemisphere, but the scale of death from crime is unacceptable in almost every corner of the Americas. And it is largely because we have been paying a very heavy price in some countries for Second Amendment rights, in other countries for the right to bear arms. And regrettably, technology has so evolved that those arms, when born, can be disproportionate in its impact, particularly when used in conflict. That we, number 4, if we have a problem and we see it, it's all right to complain, but when you complain, bring a solution. Because at the core of resilience is your capacity to think outside of the box and to recognize that you are part of the solution and not only a victim of the problem. And that requires a cultural mindset, because other than that, people believe that the only entity required to move, particularly in a crisis, is a government. When in truth and in fact, it is the collective will and participation of us all, along with the government, along with the other institutions in the society, that will make the difference. And then finally, that we have, particularly now, to recognize that we must be global citizens, because our problems are global. And the global problems will only be solved by us coming together and working together. I've taken the time to outline these things, because when we finish dealing with the reform of the international financial architecture, and when we recognize that the legislative and the institutional reform that must come will come through cooperation, etc., we will not make the last mile without having equally the empowerment of our people, the emancipation of their minds, and the commitment of them to be part and parcel of that group, that army, that capacity to protect and to still create opportunities. In our context, we are choosing to do it through the embracing of the mission, economy, and missions for development. And the 6 missions that we've chosen for ourselves is that we must first respond to ensure that we protect our environment, our clean environment, green, and blue. We are an island, and therefore more ocean is under our jurisdiction than land. We are a small island developing state, but we are a large ocean state. Pick which one you want, but both must be embraced. 2, that if we look in the mirror and we don't like who we see, then we're not going to be able to give of ourselves, give of our best, and not be able to help be part and parcel of the army to build resilience. 3, that we must be able to make sure that people are fed and have access to water, because without food and water, it's just a moot point now. 4thly, that we must ensure that we can make our societies safer and healthier. And if between now and 2030 we can improve those numbers by 50%, we will have done well, recognizing that that is not the destination, but it is simply the point at which we can get further impetus to be able to complete the mission. 5thly, that we must empower and enfranchise our people. We are at danger, particularly given the scale of funds necessary for building resilience, of having to go outside of the countries. And while foreign capital is important, foreign capital must never so decimate the participation of domestic capital such that our citizens become tenants in their own land rather than citizens that have been enfranchised and are capable of forging their own destiny. And finally, the recognition that digitalization is critical. This is not a normal audience. You are development practitioners. And in being development practitioners, it is therefore important to see how all of these things come together with a single objective of being able to lift our people out of poverty, protect those who are already out of poverty, create opportunities for all, and ensure that as we do so, we play our part to lift our weight against the global challenges that face us, and that the need for us to participate in the global public commons. We in this region can do better and can do more. We have done well, but we will never be able to put ourselves to rest until we take all who can be taken out of that trap of poverty. And it is not just the economic poverty that I speak of now, but it is also the spiritual and cultural poverty that matters. And that is why I've also addressed the issue of the beacons of excellence. I hope that as you reflect here, and I noticed the difference between the Bridgetown Declaration and the Bridgetown Initiative, but I know that the spirit that undermines both is the same. And I say simply to you that you could not start this meeting at a better time than the celebration of Diwali, which sends the message of love and light and gives us hope. And it is against that backdrop that this opening takes place today. And as I wish all happy Diwali, I also simply say to us that let us take the time to think outside of the box and to recognize that within our own region, we have unique solutions that have worked to keep our people resilient. Let us take the best of those, but equally not be afraid to modernize the processes and the systems and the attitudes necessary to complete the journey. I hope that by meeting here in Barbados, that it will signal that not just for the purposes of ECLAC or UNDP, that there is cooperation. But Donna, let us see the best from Trinidad working in Barbados. Let us see Dolores, the best from Belize, working in Barbados. And there are other faces across this room that I'm familiar with. Let us ensure that we share with each other, because it is only in sharing best practices that we can perhaps come closer to identifying things that are culturally relevant to our people, but at the same time capable of effectively working. And Manuel, as we do all of this, the measurement of what we do is so important. And in too many of our countries, the systems for measurement are simply not there. In my own country, we are continuing to grapple with the fact that we are not measuring appropriately the informal economy. And while we have done rebasing with respect to those things that we can measure, we have still not found the mechanisms to measure the informal economy sufficiently. I want to suggest that if this can be the threat to democracy, it needs also to be the protector of democracy by being able to allow us to start to measure in real time those things that we couldn't before. And the notion of a 10-year census belongs to an analog world. But the capacity to measure data in real time must be mastered by us all if we are to be effective in deploying scarce resources to vulnerable people. So I wish you all the very best. I thank you for coming to Barbados. Kirk has already told you the wonders of this particular location. There is no possibility of you having to be shipwrecked on the reefs, but I could arrange for you to be detained in Barbados. And it is against that backdrop, I simply say that if you chose to, we have come to recognize that Bajans by birth, Bajans by descent, Bajans by choice. And very often, Bajans by choice bring a lot of recent passion. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister Mottley. Thank you for talking the truth in your own words. We congratulate you and the government of Barbados for its continued commitment to prioritizing social protection, inclusion, and climate justice, and for putting people at the center of the development reform. As we in the Caribbean and Latin America grapple with multiple challenges that transcend borders, it is important that communities not only survive, but thrive after disruptive events. This is the essence of resilience and the essence of our conference and forum in the coming days. Prime Minister, you spoke of share pot in the Bajan culture, and it reminded me of how we in the magnificent continent of Africa always have meals in a circle. There is a reason for that. It is because when you eat in a circle, and these meals are usually including cousins and extended family or neighbors, it means if new guests come, you only shift a little bit backward and you create space for many. And there is an underlying principle in that, which is if one falls, there is a time when others will fall. But if one falls and the circle, with its momentum, pull them back, we remain united and we all remain fed and in good condition. I think with that in mind, I ask all of us to be willing to shift slightly in how we think, shift slightly in our policy making, shift slightly in how we allocate finances so that others who are in poverty can join the circle, so that others that are marginalized can join the circle. You will be surprised if each of us shifts only slightly. It will not be thousands, it will be millions that we bring to our circle, and we can share the resources of this beautiful planet, which are abundant actually, and plenty of it just goes to waste. I thank you. I thank all the distinguished speakers. I thank all of the ministers that made their way to be here for this important conversation. I do ask that we come with innovation and come with an open mind to find new solutions and look for new innovative, digitalized ways of moving forward. I cannot end without thanking the government of Barbados, the Prime Minister, the Minister, but also the team behind the Minister in the Ministry of People Empowerment and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and my team in UNDP here at the MCO, but also at the regional level. I thank you all and wish you a fantastic forum, and we hope that we come out with something and an action plan and a declaration that will help us move forward. I do ask the speakers to remain where they are, and I will hand over to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Limya, and thank you to all the distinguished speakers and Prime Minister Amor Mottley for their insightful and thoughtful remarks. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage His Excellency, Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, affectionately known in Barbados as the Mighty Gabby. We're making just a slight adjustment to our stage design to accommodate the Mighty Gabby. He's a cultural ambassador of Barbados, legendary calypsonian, folk musician, and social activist. He is known for his sharp wit and his satirical lyrics, but he is, through that medium, able to bring to our consciousness the critical social issues that affect not only us here in Barbados, but in the region and across the world. Today he's singing two of my favorites, Emerton, which is a song of exile, and I'll give you a little background to Emerton. Emerton was a small village within Bridgetown, and the government was moving those city dwellers to another space in order to build a sewage plant. And Gabby crafted the most amazing song called Emerton. And wherever you are in the world, Emerton applies to you, to being moved from what you consider your home to being exiled to somewhere else. He's also singing another classic, Bridgetown, which is a tribute to the artisans and the vendors who occupy the Bridgetown space early on a Saturday morning. Listen to the lyrics of this song, and wherever you are from in this region, you know these people, and in some instances, you are these people. And to show you how versatile he is, he just leaned over to me and said, I've just written something as I'm sitting here for Latin America and the Caribbean. Tell me he is not an amazing artist. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for His Excellency, Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, the Mighty Gabby.
Thank you very much. I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. And as Joe said, I'm going to start with what I just wrote. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we working together. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we moving together. No, I want to see how good you all are. Sing with me. I can sing it a little slower so we get it together, okay? Let's go. Say, Latin America, and the Caribbean, we working together. Everybody. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we working together. Latin America, and the Caribbean, we moving together. Thank you. Bridgetown early, Saturday morning. See the women, how they call it, singing. Come for your breadfruit, come for the corn, come for the apples, fresh as the morn. Come for banana, come for potato, come for the guava, 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 guava. Saturday morning, you see the children, how they're smiling, singing, don't be no fool, don't play too cute. Fill up your belly with lovely fresh fruit. Come for the breadfruit, come for the corn, come for the apples, fresh as the morn. Come for banana, come for potato. Come for the guava, the guava, the guava, the guava. Fresh down early Saturday morning, oh morning. La 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 la. Bye bye banana ine, ala la 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 le le le, ay 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 gala 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 Saturday morning. Fresh dog early, Saturday morning. Fresh dog early, Saturday morning. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say this quickly. I thought I saw my friend Jerry Walcott somewhere here. Jerry, put your hand up. Right there. I want you to know that it was his grandmother that encouraged me to get into music. Not Jerry. Jerry cannot sing. Jerry is my dear, lifelong friend. When I told next door, if I push up my hand like that, I used to touch Jerry's house. That's how next door it was. And his grandmother is the one that taught me, to take me on, and put me to sit down. But I had to always report. My mother would tell Miss Walcott if I behaved good the past few days, and then I would get the chance to listen to the thing named Jerry, the thing, the record going around. The RCA and Victor or something or yada. Anyhow, it's a thing, you wind up with your hand and thing, and then she used to put on a big white cloth over it afterwards and tell me, I'll see you next week. So, you know, I have to thank Jerry's grandmother, Miss Walcott, for encouraging me into music. And she's my first teacher. So, thanks, Jerry. And Jerry, thanks for not interrupting when we were doing our thing at that time. And this is a song from our area. Tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget, it is there I want my own children to grow. All right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I would never, never, never forgive you because to forget that you bring bulldozers and push down the houses. So, all right, I say I shall go. Oh, you tell me to forget. You bring bulldozers and push down the houses. Oh, all right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I will never, 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 never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. Oh, you tell me to forget that you uproot my people and scatter them to and fro. All right, I say I shall go. Oh, you tell me to forget that you did the wrong things and didn't let my children know. All right, I say I shall go. But I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. I hope you know it's true that I will never, 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 never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. Oh, you tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right there, so all right, I say I shall go. All right, I say I shall go. All right, I say I shall go, 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 I shall go. I say I shall go. Thank you very much. Thank you. I am the luckiest guy in the world. I have either worked or visited 23 Latin countries. I am so grateful for the opportunity, but I also have to mention that the first song I ever wrote in my life was a song called Vote for Mottley and Get Free Cakey. And it was for my dear friend, Prime Minister Mayor Mottley's grandfather. Thank you all very much.
His Excellency Dr. the Most Honorable Anthony Carter, the Mighty Gabby, a cultural ambassador of Barbados. Wasn't that an amazing performance, ladies and gentlemen? Please, another round of applause for the Mighty Gabby. And as you listen to him, did you not see yourself reflected in the lyrics of those songs? His timeless repertoire, it not only entertains, it also educates, providing incisive commentary on contemporary society, not only in Barbados, but the wider Caribbean. And his masterpiece, Emerton, as I told you earlier, is a song of exile that resonates with displaced people around the globe. As we conclude this opening ceremony, we invite everyone to join us for a coffee break in the foyer for approximately 15 minutes. It's a perfect opportunity to connect, reflect, and recharge. You can get some photographs with Gabby. And we will see you back here in 15 minutes for the inspiring panel discussion on culture as a tool for development in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the mighty Gabby will also join us for that panel discussion. Let's keep it tight, ladies and gentlemen. 15 minutes.